Hi, everyone. My name is Jarvis. Welcome to the podcast, Voices on the Journey. Today, we're talking about COVID-19. According to Johns Hopkins Coronavirus Resource Center, globally, over 3 million people have died from COVID-19. This is certainly the greatest global struggle in our lifetime. And in Canada, over 24,000 people have died. And I read that 1 in 45 people with COVID-19 have died. Canada is in its third wave of COVID-19. In fact, yesterday, 175 new cases in Nova Scotia. And hopefully this is our last wave with the rollout of vaccines. As many of you know, this pandemic has disrupted everything. It has disrupted schools. It has disrupted churches, it has disrupted businesses, it has disrupted relationships and more. In light of this, it makes sense to have a conversation. Dr. Heather Kelly is here to answer some questions that relate to this pandemic. Welcome.
Thank you, Jarvis. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Dr. Kelly is a medical doctor in the greater Moncton area, and she's part of the Our Journey Church family. And she's married to Pablo and has 2 children. Dr. Kelly, we are your patients today.
I'm actually off today, and I have, thankfully, I have another doctor who's looking after my office for this week, actually. So
I don't have my Johnny Church shirt on for this interview, but you'll be okay with that, right?
Yeah, I'll try to go on. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I got some questions for you. Since you've thought about this a lot, and we'd love to hear your response. The first question that I have is this. I read that 50% of Canadians report that their mental health is worsening during this pandemic. So in light of that, is your workload heavier as a medical doctor during this pandemic?
Yeah, I think it's been a strange year for everyone. Just kind of, how things have gone in terms of heavier or not. I think, we're always kind of, dealing with a lot of different things. I think obviously we've had to kind of switch to a lot of, over the phone type of appointments, which makes it a little bit difficult, or sometimes even a little bit easier for people to have access. I definitely agree with you about the mental health aspect. I know myself and my colleagues, around like January, February, we're really noticing, a really strong kind of increase in our mental health visits, and just, people kind of really struggling. I think just a combination of, that long of a pandemic and lockdown and bad weather in the winter and everything. So I think, mental health issues, although always common, we're even more, extreme for sure. Now, I'm hopeful kind of in the spring and the summer, both as restrictions are kind of lifted, and also, people can get outside more, that things will get better. But for sure, the mental health aspect of the pandemic can't be, diminished at all.
And hopefully in the midst of the business, you can find some rest.
Yes.
Heather, each day in Canada, about 100,000 people are tested for COVID-19. Should there be more testing, in your opinion?
So that's just because of the way the healthcare is administered in Canada. That's very provincial dependent, okay? So in New Brunswick, I would say that overall we're doing enough testing. The reason I say that is that one kind of good marker of how much, if you're doing enough testing, is your test positivity rate. So overall throughout this pandemic, our test positivity rate in New Brunswick was about 0.6%, so less than 1%, which is very, very good. So most epidemiologists say, like, if your test positivity rate, less than 5%, then you're really doing kind of enough testing. For example, earlier this week in Alberta, their positivity rate was 12%. So what that shows is that they're likely missing a lot of cases, and they're probably not doing quite as much testing as they need to be. So I think, just like as we've seen kind of throughout COVID, is that it's very province dependent. And I think New Brunswick has been doing enough testing. I think there's some question about, have we used enough of the rapid testing? is our system kind of good enough? But overall, the amount of tests that we've done, I would say that, we're not missing kind of large numbers of cases, which is what we want.
I've heard of families over in Europe have a home test to find out if they have COVID-19. Is that something that we might have here in New Brunswick?
Right. Yeah, it seems like we haven't used a whole lot of like the rapid testing or the home testing. I know that it is possible because my sister actually returned recently from Tanzania and was in quarantine here in New Brunswick, and she had to do a home test, halfway through her quarantine, and then, a courier came and picked it up and that sort of thing. So, I mean, we do have kind of the capabilities, and I don't know if there's if that's going to be used more or not. I'm not sure.
Okay. One thing that I hear a lot during this pandemic, and I'm sure you've heard it a lot too, is this statement: more people die from the flu than COVID-19. How do you respond to that when you hear that?
Right. And I think maybe at the very beginning of COVID, that was perhaps true. At this point in time, that's just not factually true. I looked up and kind of the deaths in 2019, which is kind of our last kind of bad influenza season here in Canada, was about 6,300 people. And like you said in your introduction, already this year with COVID, we've had almost 25,000 Canadians die. So a lot more people died this year of COVID than they have definitely in the past of influenza, and that's despite all these restrictions that we have. The mortality rate of influenza is usually about 0.1%. For COVID, we're seeing, about 2% overall kind of mortality rate. So about 20 times more deadly than influenza. So it's not the same, at all, really.
And certainly if there was no vaccine, a lot more people would be losing their lives. Well, thank you for presenting the facts to us on that question. When the polio vaccine was declared safe and effective years ago, the news was met with celebration. Some danced in the streets. Kids were sent home to celebrate. And, what can you say to those struggling with uncertainty about the COVID-19 vaccine?
That's interesting about the polio, and I wonder if that's because so many more people had like personal experience, with polio, either getting themselves or seeing other people, and I don't think that necessarily we've seen that, with COVID, especially here in New Brunswick, where we have been relatively fortunate and we haven't been as hard hit. So I do wonder maybe kind of where people haven't seen the devastation of COVID, that there is a bit more of a hesitancy a bit. I think obviously we just need to, look at the news and, kind of the devastation in India and everything, what is happening right now with COVID, when there aren't available kind of treatments or vaccines, right? I do understand, people being a bit concerned about, maybe, the speed that the vaccines were developed. What do we know, kind of, what are the side effects? What are the long-term effects of this? I'd say, honestly, I feel like we've been, really, really lucky with the way that the vaccines have been developed. They've been shown to be very safe and also extremely effective, more effective than, really we had any right to kind of think that they would be after this period of time. I guess maybe a bit of the science geek in me, but it's quite exciting to me, kind of, especially the new like mRNA technology with the vaccines. Obviously you've done a lot of reading. I don't know if you read, a couple months ago or maybe a few weeks ago in the New York Times, they talked about this woman, Dr. Katie Carico, who had, essentially devoted her life to mRNA technology and has worked decades and decades on this technology. Never really had, the proper funding or, any kind of, push kind of, from universities or anything, but really kind of believed in this technology. And it's actually her research that has, helped develop both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, which is just, I mean, an incredible kind of accomplishment, for her, and obviously very timely for us. I mean, we say the mRNA vaccine is about 94-95% efficacy, which is massive, really, and also even quite good efficacy, 70-80% after one dose, even, which is amazing. AstraZeneca a little bit lower, about 70% efficacy, but that's against any kind of COVID, even better against any kind of serious illness or death. So, I mean, the vaccines are very safe, very effective, and I mean, it really is kind of our only option in terms of trying to end this pandemic. Not going to diminish the concerns about, certainly kind of the AstraZeneca, the blood clotting. I definitely understand, people kind of wondering about this. I guess what I have to say, nothing in medicine or in life comes without any risk. And it's all about balancing, what are the relative risks, the absolute risks. And, overall, the risk of getting a vaccine is, less risky than, getting your car every day and driving. That's probably the most risky thing any of us do on a daily basis, to be honest. So, I mean, I do think the more people that get the vaccine, I think people will be reassured. I was looking today, and I think there's been 1.2 billion doses of the vaccines have been given out so far worldwide. So, you're not going to be the first one. You're definitely not the guinea pig if you're still waiting on the fence. There's a couple billion people who have gone before you. So I hopefully, you can feel safe about that.
We're looking at the people in the UK who got that first, and they're fine.
Right.
And even before it was released publicly, thousands of people were tested to see how they were responding, and most are okay. And
yeah, I mean, it's a real-time trial kind of worldwide with these vaccines, right? Every day we add more people kind of to this, and of course there are going to be adverse events. There are with any vaccine, to be honest, but overall, kind of, it's obviously a huge benefit.
And I like what you said, that technology has come a long way, even 25 years ago, but the reason we can roll these out so much quicker is because of the impressive technology that we have as opposed to years ago. Dr. Heather Kelly, another question for you. How effective are the vaccines towards the new variants? We hear about so many variants, the Amazon variant, the UK variant. How effective are these towards the new variants?
So the mRNA vaccines have actually proven to be very effective, which is, again, just so fortunate. I was actually just reading today on Twitter. I follow kind of some different doctors and everything, and they had released kind of the most recent data of the vaccines against, like you said, the Brazil, the UK, the India, the South Africa variant. And overall, the vaccines are very effective against the variants. Maybe slightly less, but very slightly less. The only kind of exception I would say there is that the AstraZeneca vaccine did not show very good efficacy against the South Africa variant. It did show efficacy against like the UK, for example, but not the South African variant.
So take our vaccine to fight against this COVID-19. This vaccine is a gift, and one way we love our neighbor is to take this vaccine.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I mean, the vaccines, yes, they're going to work, personally, but they also work kind of on a society-wide basis once enough people have them, right? And so, you're not just getting it to protect yourself, you're getting it to protect your community, your neighbors, your vulnerable people.
Dr. Kelly, do you think there will be a yearly COVID-19 vaccine like the flu vaccine because of all the variants, or is it hard to say at this point?
I think, I don't know if it will be kind of, ongoing for the rest of our lives. I think for the next probably few seasons, most likely. I do know that, Canada has ordered, many millions of booster doses of Pfizer for 2022, and I certainly expect that will be necessary. Now, whether it will become like a seasonal kind of thing like the influenza, I think it's possible, but I also think it's possible that this may kind of die out, something like the 1918 kind of influenza at some point did as well. And I was reading kind of yesterday, and with all this new kind of vaccine technology, they are trying to, develop more of like a pan coronavirus vaccine, which would cover for, many different coronaviruses, which is all obviously very exciting as well, using kind of like different technology like nanoparticles, which, and if that's the case, you may be able to get that and then not get it. But I can't make any kind of real predictions. I do expect 2022, you'll be getting another shot, most likely for sure.
Okay. I tried to find a Canadian stat for this, but I read a US stat. It says that 1/4 of all people in the United States will not get a vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
Will there always be restrictions
Mm-hmm.
because of the percentage of people who refuse to be vaccinated?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be an issue. In 1/4, I've even heard maybe even a bit more than that in the U.S. who are kind of saying that they won't get it. I think most people at this point in time have heard of what we call herd immunity, and essentially, kind of, there's no exact number to get to that, but I know a lot of people are kind of talking about, 70, 80%. And so that means, 70, 80% of the population are vaccinated, okay? And what the herd immunity does, it provides indirect protection to those who are not immune, okay? Whether, they haven't got the vaccine or maybe they're not able to. I mean, even though the Pfizer say 95% effective, that means, there's 5% that it's not effective. And so that herd immunity just kind of, it stops that transmission earlier, and so there are fewer infections. The other kind of huge part of having fewer infection overall is that there's less chance for mutations and less chance for variants, of course. So, if we only get to, 60%, 70%, are there still going to be some restrictions? Most likely. I would say more, in terms of travel, certainly. Will it come to the point where, you're not allowed to travel unless you have had the vaccine? I think that's possible. I mean, that's not a new thing. I mean, there's lots of countries, where you need to have certain vaccines. I think a lot of people have gotten, the yellow fever vaccine and need to have that in their passport if you travel to certain countries, or typhoid, and lots of people get the Twinrix vaccine before they go down south. So I do see that could possibly be something. Whether we'll continue to wear masks indoors in poorly ventilated areas, I think that will likely continue for at least a time. I think, that kind of culture of mask wearing when you're in places like, stores or buses or subways is something that's quite common, like in Asia, and has been for many, many years. So I do think there are certain restrictions that won't be lifted until we do reach kind of that herd immunity.
Right. And I read over in Europe, where a good number of people have been vaccinated, that there was one big event, and they suggested that people take off their masks and see how they respond to this. And time will tell with that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And speaking of masks, we are required still to wear a mask because of this pandemic, and a minority of people protest wearing masks. I even saw a small parade in the Moncton area here. No masks.
Right.
How effective are masks?
I tried to look up if there's any kind of actual numbers on this, and I couldn't find a whole lot. I think masks are an important part of kind of the whole kind of tool set, I guess, including hygiene, ventilation, and distancing, and all that kind of stuff. I've heard that proper mask use can reduce the risk of infection by respiratory virus up to maybe 80%, which is very, very good. It seems like it's worked extremely well for certainly for influenza or the normal kind of RSV, which is a virus that we see every winter that affects children and babies a lot, which honestly this year we didn't see any RSV or influenza, which is very interesting. So will the mask use kind of become like a seasonal thing for to help prevent not just COVID but influenza? Perhaps, yeah.
I even saw glasses where there's a shield around
Oh.
people's glasses because apparently the virus can enter into eyes as well. Is that true?
Yes, that is true. And I think that's why, certainly in the hospital settings with certain procedures and that sort of thing, we would need to use eye protection as well.
Okay. Well, I know people protest masks, but they don't protest wearing clothes or seatbelts. So hopefully.
Yeah, I never quite understood it because it doesn't seem like that much of an inconvenience to, put a little mask on for the 20 minutes you're in your grocery store and then take it off when you get out. But I don't know.
I hear you. Can one still carry COVID-19 even after one is vaccinated?
Yeah, you can. There will be breakthrough infections. Now, the risk is obviously much, much, much lower. The risk of becoming seriously ill with it is very, very low. I was looking at kind of some numbers yesterday, and like, for example, in the US there's 77 million people that are fully vaccinated right now, and of those 77 million, around 70 people have died of COVID kind of after that. Now that's probably about normally we would expect many, many, many more thousands of people to have died. So, I mean, it works very, very well, but there will be some, like what we call the breakthrough infections.
Okay. If we get one shot of Moderna and one shot of Pfizer, what would happen? Or are they the same type of vaccine?
Yeah, the mix and match. They're really looking into this. So the ones that you mentioned there, the Pfizer and Moderna, are both very similar vaccines. They're both mRNA vaccines. Okay, so theoretically, would they work the same? Most likely. Now, right now, that would be considered like an off-label use, but they are doing studies on this. They're doing a study right now in the UK where people have volunteered. I think there was about 800 volunteers. It was launched in February, where people got one vaccine. I think it was actually the AstraZeneca, and then got a different vaccine for their second shot. And those results will be released in a few weeks. We think that it would likely be fine, and sometimes maybe even more of a robust immune response with different vaccines. They are doing that in Quebec right now, in long-term care. Some people who received a Moderna vaccine first have gotten the Pfizer as the second one, just because there was issues with supply of Moderna. Certainly no adverse events of that yet. And like I said, theoretically it should be fine. And I imagine that will happen. I do imagine that we're going to start, mixing them at some point.
So if you got the Moderna vaccine and then it's time for the second one and there's no Moderna and there's only Pfizer, you would recommend take it anyway?
I would, personally.
Okay.
Without any questions, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
This is the first pandemic during the era of social media, which makes things interesting. Professor Howard Snyder said, "What's good about conspiracy theories is that they are a pretty reliable guide to what's not true. The best ones have a few crumbs of truth mixed in just to confuse people and make the theory seem plausible." What is the best way to respond to people who believe that COVID-19 is a conspiracy?
Yeah, it's a very timely question. I think, especially I think we've seen over the last few years, this people who are kind of, getting into these conspiracy theories and becoming, a bit more popular. And it's really tough, to be honest. It's really tough to kind of get people, out of that. And I do think that, certainly what you don't want to do is you don't want to attack, to ridicule these people, even though sometimes it might be tempting to, say, I can't believe you believe that, but, to not do that, just because we know that it just makes people more entrenched in their positions. They just get more defensive and they go kind of further down into, kind of that rabbit hole of, either, YouTube or Facebook or, different kind of websites that kind of, that echo chamber of what they kind of, want to hear. And I think underlying a lot of this conspiracy theories is, perhaps a bit of, anxiety, how the world is working or what's going on in the world. So I think, just having empathy for these people, asking them questions. I mean, oftentimes these people kind of pride themselves on, I've done my own research, I'm skeptical, I'm curious. And sometimes you can almost use that just by asking questions and, oh, okay, you thought that. And, sometimes, they'll see maybe some of the flaws in the logic, that sort of thing, or just, connecting with them on a personal basis. Like if this is a family member or a friend that's kind of really gone down this, to not really engage with them in terms of kind of the conspiracy theory, but just, have a relationship with them, remember kind of, different memories, that sort of thing. Questions are definitely better than kind of, assertions, I would say. And you need to give people space to, change their minds, and change their mind and keep their dignity about that, right? So I think, we need to, like I said, come at it from a point of empathy, and these people have, some concerns. And just like you said, there's sometimes small kernels of truth in this. And so, just getting people to question it and to keep that relationship open.
Oh, that's a good word. I know Jesus in the Gospels asked hundreds of questions. And I think that's a good response to us when dealing with this. I think, first of all, to listen, as you said, and each situation is different. I get it, but to also ask questions. And I remember having a conversation with someone, and they had an aha moment. I mean, they were reading a lot of memes on Facebook and concerned about the vaccine. And I said, for me, in my own story, I'm going to trust a doctor like Dr. Francis Collins and not a meme on Facebook. Dr. Francis Collins is a Christian, and he's the boss of Peter Fauci. And he was a Christian as well. And Dr. Francis Collins mapped out our human DNA, 3 billion characters long. So I say, for me, I'm going to trust a doctor who endorses these vaccines, who has also looked at our human DNA, who oversaw the Human Genome Project, which is the greatest discovery, I think, of our time. And so I try to present a picture and let that person conclude,
right.
How should we think about this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know when I've had success, with some of my, vaccine hesitant patients and families, is just, just have that kind of dialogue with them and to be open. And, and I tell them, I'm always going to ask you about this and see, where you're at kind of with it. And honestly, I've had, the vast majority of people have come around and have decided, to for example, to vaccinate their children. I think it's a lot to do with that relationship, and also, just being available to answer questions, and, if they feel comfortable, and, kind of working with people where they're at. If people, some people want to do, a different schedule or something, and, fine, we'll do that. I want you to feel comfortable as well.
You're a follower of Jesus and also a doctor, and some people of faith are against science. Are faith and science in conflict?
I mean, to me, no. I guess I've never kind of completely kind of understood why there was kind of that, conflict between faith and science. I don't think you have to be one or the other. And I think, I was quite lucky that, I grew up in church, and I knew, a lot of the, most faithful people at my church were, scientists or doctors or dentists or pharmacists who, that wasn't kind of a conflict there. I do think that, there are issues on both extremes. I think, there are some people who make science their religion or science kind of, their God, and I don't think that's right either. I mean, ultimately, saying you believe in science, I don't even know if that really going to make sense. Science is just a method. It's just a tool we use to figure things out. I think God, gave us the ability to think and brains to kind of, figure things out. Like you said, Dr. Collins, he's a Christian, and he still wanted to figure out the human genome. So I feel that, these are ways that we're able to kind of, help our fellow people. I think, God wants human flourishing, right? And, if we're able to kind of develop kind of, treatments or medications or vaccines that, that can help prevent so much suffering and death, I think that's, I don't think there's any conflict there with our faith.
I've always asked the question, who created science?
Well, God, right?
Yeah. And so faith and science. He's not only the God of science, but the God of history, the God of philosophy. And as you said, we can pull from all these different areas and they can all work together. And I know I mentioned Dr. Francis Collins, and he lays out in his book, The Language of God, how science and faith can be in harmony with each other. So if you're looking for a resource, that's Dr. Francis Collins, the boss of Peter Fauci. Just FYI. I didn't know that connection. I thought it was pretty amazed when I heard that. Cool. When do you see us getting to the other side of COVID-19, or will the finish line keep moving because of the new variants?
Finish line, I feel like things will kind of go back to maybe kind of more normal, like late summer, fall here, kind of, once we've reached kind of that, 70-80% vaccine uptake. I think, that has been shown, in different countries, the UK, Israel, that, a lot of things can go back to normal kind of then. I know that just kind of this week, I think, Pfizer is getting or trying to get approval for kids over 2. So, obviously things can't completely go back to normal until kids are also vaccinated, just because, they can be, reservoirs of the infection and spread. So once kids are vaccinated, school can be back to normal. I think the last thing to really kind of go back to normal would be like, international travel, without quarantine or any kind of travel restrictions. And I wouldn't be planning anything till probably 2022, kind of internationally, really, at least. But I do think there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
So one final question for you. With the light at the end of the tunnel, with the finish line in view, we're getting there with the vaccines, thankfully. What are your plans? Travel, maybe? What are your plans after the new normal?
After the new normal. I guess my short-term plan is hopefully the Atlantic bubble opens up. One of my good friends lives in Nova Scotia, so it'd be nice to be able to see her. My husband is signed up to run the marathon in Nova Scotia at the end of July. So really hoping that will happen. Kind of longer term, I know a few of my friends and I have been talking, maybe about a Europe trip, maybe within the next year or two, which should be quite nice. And my son Tomas has only been on a plane when he was a baby, and Mika's never been anywhere on a plane. So every time they see one in the sky, they say, "Oh, I want to go on a plane sometime when the virus is gone." So I'll have to do a family trip.
And some camping in Nova Scotia. That's my home province. I'm a little biased.
Very good.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kelly. I heard from a doctor in the UK, Dr. John Campbell. He has a YouTube channel. He has a daily video. If you're interested in checking it out, that's for our listeners as well. Dr. John Campbell, he said we need to be more proactive and less reactive. In other words, may we be a roadblock to this outbreak, and we're happy that the end is in sight. Thank you for painting a picture and answering these questions today, and thank you for serving our community.
Thank you very much for having me.